Today's guest has lived what can really only be described as several lifetimes all rolled up into one. She was born in the former Soviet Union, where she escaped at the age of 20, just weeks after the Berlin Wall had fallen. She came to the United States, got her degree in journalism, and she built a career as a journalist, some of which was a war correspondent reporting from Afghanistan right after 9/11 had happened. Then in 2009, at the age of 40, she was diagnosed with an aggressive form of breast cancer, and she was told that without chemotherapy, she would not survive. She trusted her intuition and her instincts, and she declined the standard of care, put on her investigative journalism shoes, and she set out to understand how she could reverse this cancer from the root cause. 17 years later, she remains cancer free, and the soups she created as part of her own healing became a business that sold out cleanses within 24 hours, landed her on Good Morning America, and earned her endorsements from some of the top doctors literally in the world. In this episode, we dig into her remarkable journey from the Cold War Soviet Union to her being a war correspondent overseas, and her cancer diagnosis that really changed everything. The intense pressure that she faced to follow the conventional path and why she chose differently. We also look at why it is that every patient should know about different cancer grades versus the stages, and we unpack how her soup company was almost born by accident from a Christmas where she had nothing to give but a home cooked meal, and how she's since turned her calling into an intensive 90-day healing journey with clients facing cancer. We also talk about the power of intuition, meditation, and learning to really truly listen to the body, and why it is that she says her diagnosis that nearly took her life became her greatest gift. Enjoy this episode of The Business of Medicine with Elina Fuhrman. We're going to definitely get into the work that you do in cancer healing, and the way in which that you team up with your clients, and not just the cancer space, but in a whole host of other areas with autoimmune and you name it. But where's the most interesting place to start with your journey? Would it be as a war correspondent in Afghanistan? Would it be before that? Where should we even start?
Goodness, that is a really good question. I do feel like
Yeah.
I've lived too many lives or too many chapters of this life. The universe definitely has the plan for me, or I guess I created this plan before I incarnated. I don't know. Sometimes I wonder myself
Yeah.
what
It's
it is.
impressive.
Um,
So
but
where did you grow up? Did you grow up in the United States
yes,
or elsewhere?
I grew up in the former Soviet Union, and I grew up in a tiny little country called Moldavia. It was an independent country for years. It was part of kingdoms. It was part of the Ottoman Empire. It became part of the Soviet Union right after the second rather World War started, and then was part of the Soviet Union until the early 90s, and then is now an independent country again called Moldova. So the name has changed as well. So sometimes I wonder where I'm from myself because there's so many explanations. I can't just say I'm from there. Like I have to explain. I have to go like,
Right.
I'm from here, but this is now called here, and I'm not really sure where I'm from. So
Sure.
sometimes I shorten it. I am a citizen of the world, but yeah, that's where I grew up under communism in the height of the Cold War, really, and that was the first chapter of my life, right up until I was 20 when I ran away from the former Soviet Union. I was studying in Moscow at the time, and I came to the United States at the age of 20, 3 weeks after the Berlin Wall collapsed. And that's why my journey started in the United States, which is a fantastic story on its own, but a
Uh-huh.
very long story. But here in the United States, I got a second degree. I got my master's in journalism and also studied pre med, funny enough, because I had to I had to fill certain requirements, and I was naturally drawn to understanding more about a human body. And when they handed me a catalog of classes and told me, like, look at these classes for these requirements, look at these classes for those requirements. I can't even remember what was what, but I just remember that I picked certain classes that happened to be requirements for pre-med, and I was not aware of that.
Okay.
But it was really cool. So I studied history of medicine, I studied nutrition, and yeah, so alongside my journalism degree. And then back in the Soviet Union, because I was growing up during the Cold War, we were told that America is gonna start a war with us, which it was the same situation with America. Americans were told that Soviet Union was going to start a war with them. But so what the Soviet Union did is, like, every university student studied medicine. Once well, rather, girls did. Boys studied defense, like arms and things like that, but girls studied medical nursing kind of skills. And what that looked like, it was one day out of every week we were taught different, biology and how to inject ourselves and how to recognize certain, concussions, like if we're in the war zone, and, like what to do about this, how to do a tourniquet, how to stop bleeding, how to, look at the eyes, how to feel the pulse and do all these different things that we supposedly might have had to do should a war break out.
So this was less about the profession and more about the preparing the population for what could be happening, and then having to know these skills in the event that something was going on in the middle of the streets.
Correct, correct. And
Wow.
what they called it was so all the girls would, when they graduate from school, they would also, alongside of their profession, they would be nurses of civil defense. So should the war to start, we could be drafted as nurses to the war zone. So of
Okay.
course it was only natural that I became a war journalist, right? because because why
Yeah.
wouldn't I? It just seemed so normal. And another actually very interesting story is so I was working at CNN at the time when September 11th happened, and then the war in Afghanistan, and I was asked if I would go into the war zone to Afghanistan. And so the first time I was asked was right at the very beginning, like within the first few weeks, when the war started in November. It was early December when I was asked. And I received a phone call from my boss, and he said, "I'm not going to let you go." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "You need to go through war school before you go." And I said, "Oh, I'm fine. Like, I've been through war school." And he's
Yeah, you
like,
grew up in.
"No, no, no. This is a whole other war school." So he said, "I'm going to postpone your deployment, basically, and we're gonna send you in another rotation." So I ended up going early March, but in the meantime, I did the war school, and that was another kind of introduction, if you will, to a whole other side of medical care in the war zone, that was taught to us, and of course in very different terms because the conditions were very different, and we were actually going into the war zone in a country that had nothing. So we were bringing with ourselves all kinds of drugs and all kinds of needles. And because if something were to happen, we had to help ourselves and people around us. And we needed those skills, um, just for basic survival, before we were able to be airlifted, should something happen, and things like that. And so that was another part of my medical kind of introduction before I arrived to where I am today. And then another interesting story also at CNN is that because I've always been curious about human body and why. people get sick and why certain people are sick and certain people are not, and what do you do about this and how do you go about it. I also, well, a couple things is back when I was still living in the Soviet Union, when I was 15 years old, I started cleansing. When the word cleanse didn't even exist, I stumbled upon a book by a Western doctor at somebody's apartment, at my classmate's apartment, and was fascinated by that and decided to start coffee enemas. And here I am, like 15 years old in high school in the Soviet Union, and my mother was terrified. She dragged me to a doctor, and they told me that I was damaging my organs and that I should stop immediately. But I started experimenting back when I was 15. I was always fascinated with that. And I've done cleanses in college, my own cleanses that I would put together, whether it was just apples. I don't even remember where I was getting information. There was very little information, period, you could get at that time. But somehow I was getting some information. I was always tinkering and playing with herbs and different foods and how they combine and what goes with what. And then fast forward, to my CNN days post Afghanistan, because my full time job was at CNN International, which is what I did, international news. But because of my fascination with medicine, I went across the hall at the CNN building in Atlanta, which is where I was based, and asked if I could freelance after my full-time job at the medical unit. And I did. And so
Okay.
I had like two jobs. I would finish my work at
Hmm.
CNN International. I would walk across the hall and I would freelance at the medical unit, digging up stories and, researching, producing, and looking into some of the fascinating medical stories that, people at that time were not looking at.
A couple of things that piqued my interest is you didn't develop this like hatred towards the West and America, being that you were being told that, I mean, America was going to be launching a war, and you were having to go through all these things in preparation for it. I can only imagine that the way in which they set the stage for the reason why you were being taught all these things, and the conversations were happening there. So that's one thing that's interesting that uh, I'd be curious to know your thoughts on. And the other piece of it too is that you, since 15 years old, were experimenting with, you know, um, various more naturopathic ways of health before it was really a thing. And that's why, I think it's fair to say that you were experimenting with it, but you still ultimately went the journalistic route to start, at least professionally. And then at some point there was a transition to where now you're fully in the health space of things. But tell me a little bit about those two things. First is why it is that you feel like you still have this desire to come to the United States after the wall fell, and but you still had all this experience with just the being told America was the bad guy, and then the piece of why you ultimately went the journalistic route more so than the health route.
Mhm. Well, first of all, there was no hatred. Just because it's something you're taught and you're told when you're a kid doesn't always, mean that that's how you feel. I never felt any hatred. I was more curious. And I think people around me and certainly my family and everybody, always believed that we're not being told everything and we're not being told the truth. I didn't really realize the depths of that until I was in college because, you know what you know and what's around you and so restricted with information that, you just know what you see and what people around you tell you, you know. So what changed for me was when I was in school in Moscow, when I was studying linguistics and English was my major. There were very few of us. I was studying at a pedagogical university with a very small English department. There were only 28 of us, and we were all watched really because we were exposed to foreigners, and people who were exposed to foreigners had to be watched at that time, because there was pretty intense KGB surveillance. And I didn't know about that until I was in that situation, right? So my English was good, and one of my professors suggested that I start translating, and she introduced me to certain people. Everything was government in the Soviet Union at that time. Everything was owned by the government. Everything was, you know, just led by the government. There was no private property, no private businesses, nothing. It was all government. And so, and the reason I say this is because the translation work, what I was doing were for different organizations, but they were all ultimately government connected. And so, so I started translating and interpreting for different delegations of, people would come to the Soviet Union for, whether it's a United Nations business or some kind of, government, meetings and high level meetings, and sometimes exchange youth. Soviet Union really liked having the exchanges with young people so they can show that we have such an incredible, wonderful country. And so I would be the translator interpreter for those groups. And sometimes
Okay.
it meant sitting in the boardroom and translating, or interpreting rather, in real time. And sometimes it was going and traveling with the group of people who were in the country. And so what happened is, when you travel and when you're around people from other countries, you talk, you ask questions, you want to know what's it like living wherever they're living. Now, at that time, I never met anybody from America. There were usually people from various European countries. There were some Australians. There were, visitors from India and different African countries, Asian countries who were all very friendly with the Soviet Union because, there were this reciprocity with different countries and different governments. And, but everybody was always curious about the Soviet Union. And of course, I was very curious what it looked like in their countries. And because we had such a closed country, we couldn't travel really outside. I always wanted to, and I wanted to know. And also, when people travel, and especially people from Western Europe, they come with books and magazines and newspapers, because you read on the plane, right? And then you're flying back and you don't want to haul that old newspaper with your old magazine. So you leave it behind. So that was something that I started reading. And I was fascinated because there were things that were written there that were completely contradicting to what I was taught and that I was told. And at first, I didn't believe it because, that's the immediate reaction is, oh, they're just trying to bash us because, we have such a great country, right? But then I would go back to my studies at the university and I would ask my professors and they would go, "Where'd you get that?" I said, "Oh, I read it in Newsweek or in New York Times." And they're like, "Where'd you get the New York Times? Where'd you get Newsweek?" Like, I was working with this group and they just left it behind. And so, naturally, there were arguments, not arguments per se, but, disagreements that were beginning to be had. And so when that was happening, I would kind of file it back. And so the next time I would be with a different group, I would go like, "Well, why do you think I'm told this? And why do you think your newspaper or your magazine is saying this?" And I would have those discussions. At the same time, this was a period of like 87 to 89 where things were falling, like breaking down in the Soviet Union. There was this period that was called perestroika and glasnost, which, has been interpreted as more openness and more, freedoms. But in reality, things were just kind of cracking open at the time. And people were beginning to question openly what was actually happening. And so the same professors who would be teaching us, like we had a class, for example, called History of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. That was a class, okay? It would be like a large lecture and we had this professor who was like an elderly woman with grayish hair and a little bun. I still remember her, like I'm looking at her. She had these little glasses. And so she would always talk about the great, achievements of the Communist Party. And we would study the materials and the papers of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, of all the symposiums, which is so crazy when I think about it. And
Yeah.
so, and it was always about elevating the leaders and talking about how great our country is and how we're just marching toward communism and what an incredible achievement it is, right? And so all of a sudden, the same professor would be bringing up certain issues about Stalin, which up until then, he was considered like the greatest leader, along with Lenin and everybody else. It was confusing because it's the same person who told you something months ago, all of a sudden telling you a completely different thing. And
Yeah.
so all that prompted, you're young, like I'm 17, 18 years old, and we're in the dorm and we're all whispering and we're all talking like, do you think it's true? Do you think it's going on? I guess you would call it conspiracy theory in the United States, right? But we were
Yeah.
all conspiring and going like, how could it be true? Like, uh, could Stalin really be like that guy? Like, isn't he like the greatest man ever?
Wow.
And so
Mhm.
then you would have somebody go like, oh my God, my family actually told me, but don't tell anyone that, this uncle of ours years ago, he was taken in the middle of the night by Stalin and sent to the gulag. And then like he never came back. So we all knew that he probably died there. And we're like, really? And so I would come home and I would tell my mom, and my mom would go, don't ever tell this to anyone. Don't ever even say this in front of anyone because you can be guilty by association.
Hmm.
Stalin was the best man. Like, we all cried when he died. And I would be so confused. I'm like, I don't know what to believe because, I'm a 17, 18-year-old girl. Like, I have no clue. So it was a really confusing time, like a really, really confusing time. But back to your question, I did learn a lot about the West at that time, or I should say, not a lot, but like snippets from all of those magazines and newspapers that were left behind. And it created enough of the kind of like of a crack within me that I knew there was more there and I knew that we're not being told the truth. And so,
Hmm.
which ties to journalism when I came to the United States, because in the Soviet Union, you choose your profession and you study everything, that has to do with this profession, where education here is broader, like when you go to college, you also study a lot of things like math and, other things and science and whatever, like let's say you have a liberal arts degree in the Soviet Union. If when I chose, foreign language, which was English and linguistics as my profession, that's all I studied. I didn't have any math. I had English was dissected into pieces. I had vocabulary, I had grammar, I had phonetics, I had Shakespeare, I had practice of speech, I had, various ways of fine tuning the language, right? And the only
Hmm.
other things that we studied were philosophy, Latin, history of the of the Communist Party, and
Hmm.
medicine. Funny enough, so that's literally
Mhm.
all we studied, right? And so when I came to the United States, I was asked like, "What do you want to study?" And at first I thought computers because I've never seen computers before,
Oh,
and
wow.
I was just fascinated by computers. And I remember I was sent to the department chair of the computer sciences, and we had a beautiful conversation, and then at the end of it, he said, you can do whatever you want, you can study whatever you wish, but just being with you for the past hour, I just don't know if that's something that you would really be happy with. You seem like a
Mm.
very outgoing person, and sitting at the computer, I just don't know. Just go think about it. And that's the first time somebody like made me think about that, because I never thought about connecting something I desire and who I am to your profession, because I kind of like, it was always about being very practical, like
Yeah.
what's the right thing to do, really,
And being told by the government what you would and wouldn't do.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I went back and I had my catalog of classes and I started leafing through the catalog. And I was like, I've never seen anything like this. I was fascinated with some of the classes. And so two things stood out to me. One was broadcast journalism, because I was fascinated with the whole idea of telling the truth, right? Because in the Soviet Union, you got punished for telling the truth. and, and here you get paid. I was like,
And
oh,
yeah.
that's an interesting concept. And then advertising was another thing, because there was no advertising in the Soviet Union. And I thought that was fascinating. And so I decided to choose journalism. as my major, and major in both broadcast journalism and advertising. But when I took my first advertising class on how to create deceptive advertising, I was so turned off. I'm like, I can't do that. Like, you
Right.
basically like making people buy things by creating conditions so they buy. That's so wrong. I can't. I'm here about
Yeah.
telling the truth. I can't do that. You know?
Okay.
And so I dropped out of advertising, minor or whatever, like literally after one class, and just stayed with journalism. So that's kind of like the long answer to your question.
Okay. And how long did you do that for? Were you in journalism?
Well, it was not a straight shot to journalism, because when I graduated from college, the United States was in the middle of recession, and I just, I just got married at the end of, like, as I was graduating, I got married, and my then husband was offered a position in Washington D.C., and so we were moving to Washington D.C., and Washington D.C. was a really big journalism market. And usually, when you start in journalism, you start in smaller markets and then move up to bigger markets. And so every time I would apply for a job, they would tell me that I am overqualified to do like the entry level job, but underqualified to do anything more. And therefore, like, I couldn't get a job. So I ended up, my first job out of college was actually working in political advertising. Funny enough. I was writing and producing commercials, radio and television commercials for members of Congress and state governors. And so that was my first job. And then I started freelancing for an ABC station in Washington D.C. and then working at the Fox station there, and but then I ended up in public relations, or public affairs rather, and I started working in high tech. Because of that, I started working with companies like Microsoft and Hughes Network Systems, and also with different governments like government of Portugal and government of India. And so what I did is I launched the first digital phone. Funny enough, I launched Direct TV, and HBO was just expanding, so worked on that account. And with government of Portugal, I worked on East Timor issue before. So East Timor is an island that used to be Portuguese colony, and then was under Indonesian rule for many years, and had a lot of Christians being basically murdered there by Indonesia, and it was all kept hush hush. And and the government of Portugal, their prime minister, because a lot of family members still had people living there, they wanted to make it more of an issue so the world can hear it, and which is how I was working on it, because the United States, is a big player. And so they wanted United States involved on a political level when it comes to Indonesia and human rights in Indonesia, which is what I was working on, and brought the attention of the White House and United States Congress and top media to the plight of the people of East Timor. And so, yeah, that was actually one of the biggest highlights of my work. In public affairs is, ultimately leading to the independence of East Timor. I'm very proud of that to this day, which was very early '90s. So yeah, and then from there, I ended up working in aerospace. I know you didn't see that coming.
No, it's quite the jump.
I know, I know. I work in aerospace. So again, early '90s, we just started launching satellites into orbit, and um, and beginning this whole, which is what's happening now, where we're bouncing signal and communicating with all of the devices that we have at our disposal today. And so I worked for a company that actually no longer exists. It was called Orbital Sciences Corporation, and then we changed it to Orbital. And there were mergers, because so when I came on board, I did communications for them. they had a string of launches. They're unmanned rockets, basically carrying satellites into orbit, and they were crashing. They would launch a rocket and it would crash, and there was a lot of negative publicity about that. And they wanted to address it properly. And so that's what I was working with, but also worked on the transitioning GPS from military technology to commercial technology. Went to Dubai to do the press conference. To do that also was a really cool moment, because look at us. I remember the room full of generals, and we were sitting and they were telling how we're going to have GPS in every car. And I'm like, who needs that? you know, Look at us today.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
funny. Yeah. Yeah. So that was another chapter in my life. And then CNN for many years. And then after that, I was a travel journalist, and which was an incredible, incredible adventure, traveling all over the world and writing about the best travel destinations. And again, I was always drawn to holistic, practices and healers. And every time I would go anywhere in the world, I would split from the group, and I would always wander into pharmacies. I would always chat with people on the street and ask them about local healers. And I would always find those interesting people. And I remember I was in New Caledonia, and I was at an airport, and this woman comes out of nowhere, and we like immediately were drawn to each other, and she turned out to be a healer. And it was such a fascinating encounter. Oh my goodness, I still think about it. So that was always happening. And then in 2009, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, which came out of nowhere. And I was told that it was very aggressive, and I needed to do the full protocol of what's called standard of care, which is surgery, radiation, chemotherapy, and drugs. And I just felt immediately that that was not the route that was the right one for me. And I went on my own healing journey. I say that I put my investigative journalism shoes on and took a walk into the wellness, but truly tried to understand cancer like I would with any journalistic assignment. Like, what is cancer? That was my task, and that was my assignment, to understand, why is everybody afraid of cancer? Why is cancer such a big deal? Why did I get cancer? What is cancer all about? And so that really changed my life, because I realized, well, it took me a long time to really to realize, but I did eventually realize that that is my calling in this lifetime, and that's what I came here to do, is to translate something that is so complex and complicated into somewhat more of a relatable subject, and something that I can help people discover the capacity within themselves to heal. Because as beings, we're very powerful. Our bodies are quite miraculous. We're just not taught how to heal ourselves. And so that's what I do, is I teach you how to uncover those miraculous qualities about your own body, so you can heal yourself.
Amazing. So when you first got the news, and then you came to the conclusion yourself that you didn't want to follow the traditional standard of care. And so you put your journalism shoes on and started looking into all the things you mentioned. What is cancer? How is it impacting the body? Why did you get it? All these things. Um, Walk us through that initial journey to where you became convinced that you could heal yourself, and why it is that as you went through that process, you didn't find yourself going back to the traditional standard of care and coming to the conclusion like, oh, that this has already been looked into, and it's already been established that the standard of care is the way it is because it is the most modern, best approach. You continue following your initial hunch and suspicion that there was a different, better way, and you proved to be correct. So, um, that initial, what were those initial findings? Is you have all these questions. How are you answering those questions, and what were the answers as you uncovered them?
Well, first of all, I never take anything at face value. I always dig and I always question. And that's part of me is who I am, and part of it is I think my journalism background as well. But part of it is that's why I became a journalist, is because I dig and I want to know more. And it's an interesting thing, the standard of care, right? Because we like to talk about the advances of science, and there's a big conversation about it always, right? But yet we are stuck on the same program for decades. So where are the advances of science if we're not looking at it from those lens and from the scientific perspective? So those are the first questions that I ask. Well, okay, if we know more now than we did 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, why are we doing the same thing? So nobody can give me that answer. So I have to figure out myself. Now, initially, so when I first the first refusal to do anything had to do with just my own instinct and my own intuition. And I don't know why and how I felt the way I did, but I did. Because when initially I was told by the first oncologist, and I've gone through multiple oncologists, but when the first oncologist first told me that here's what you need to do A, B, C, and D, I said, I'm not going to do anything. And she goes, well, I know it's a shock. I know that, it's a big diagnosis. You're so young. I just turned 40 when I was diagnosed. You need to go think about it. And she turned to my husband at the time and she said, please don't let her Google and go on the internet. There's so much out there. She's just going to get confused. Wrong person to tell this to. So, you know, so so that's how it started. So then the more people I saw in the medical field, oncologists, surgeons, I interviewed multiple people in both modalities. The more I was realizing how everybody has a little bit of a different story, even though the same outcome. Everybody is doing things a little bit differently, but kind of the same. But then everybody is freaking out about what's happening within my body. So why are they freaking out? Like, why are they so convinced that I'm in such bad shape where I feel great? And that was the biggest puzzle for me, is that every time everybody would look at my tests, they would go like, whoa, like, you got to do this. You got to do this. You don't have time. And I didn't understand that. And I wanted to understand that. I wanted to understand, why is everybody telling me that I don't have time? How do they know? They're not inside my body, you know? And so that's kind of how initially I started this journey. Now, what helped me tremendously right off the bat is therapy. And I was also very lucky that I was matched by my oncologist, funny enough, with the right with the right therapist. And the reason I went to the therapist is because I declined treatments, and I was told that I needed to see a therapist because clearly something was wrong with me.
Mm.
Because why would you decline treatments, right? So go see a therapist, and I was told to go to at least 10 sessions, like minimum. And so I was recommended this specific therapist whose specialty was end of life patients. Okay.
Oh, wow.
And so when I came into her office, I was very reluctant, and I didn't see any value in that. So I sat with my arms folded like this. And she said, what brings you here? And I said, they made me come see you. And she said, okay, well, tell me something about yourself. And I said, well, what do you want to know? And at that time, I never shared any information. I was a real Soviet. Like,
Okay.
you can't crack me. You
Uh-huh.
can torture me. You won't know anything about me. I won't
Wow.
tell you anything. And
Okay.
she
Wow.
says, I said, what do you want to know? And she said, well, whatever you want to share with me. I'm like, I'm fine. And she's like, okay, but you're here. Tell me a little bit. Do you have a family? Do you have children? Like anything. Tell me anything. I'm like, yeah, I have a family. I have a great husband. I have great kids. I have a great career. My life's great. I just have this cancer thing. She's like, wow, I really don't have a lot of people whose lives are great that come here, but okay, let's start there.
Mm.
you know, so I was fully, my life was great. That's what my mind was telling me. Everything in my life was great. And I just was served this curveball by the name of cancer. And I just needed to just overcome it and I'll be back to being fine. Right. And so what I've realized, so for a long time, when I went to see her, and thank goodness for those mandatory 10 sessions, right? Because I would have not come back for the second one. But I was lucky because she didn't tell me what to do. She just kept asking questions. And another thing I really liked is she's never wrote anything down. And because if she would have, I would have not trusted her. Because I'm like, who's she writing this for? Again, like Soviet mentality
Mhm.
kicks in. Who she's going to
Mhm.
share that information with? you know?
Yeah.
So she kept asking questions. And after a while, I started hearing myself. And that was the first breakthrough. The first breakthrough is connecting to what I was saying to what I actually was saying. And so then I would come home and I would go, whoa, I guess my life is not perfect. I actually do have things I need to work on. I have quite a few issues. So, well, what am I going to do about that? How I'm gonna, deal with all those issues that I have. And so that's how it started. And then alongside, because I worked as a journalist and I was stressed, again, not aware that I was stressed, but I was very, very stressed. I also had a lot of personal things going on in my life that I felt were, that I was dealing with, and I was fine. And I was very positive and I was really good about that, but completely not even considering how all that was affecting me and my body because I was so disconnected from my body. And so then I was recommended to see this Chinese medicine doctor who took one look at me and he said, your cancer is not physical, it's emotional. It's going to be a long road, but I think you can get there. And I remember I looked at him and I thought, this guy's crazy. What's he talking about? What do you
And
mean?
how long was this after your initial diagnosis before you were talking to this
The first
Chinese doctor?
month or two, the first couple months.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
And so then he started, telling me about all these herbs and all these foods, and he was doing acupuncture. And again, I wouldn't put anything in myself without asking, like, what is this herb for? And why am I doing it like this? And so we would have these fascinating conversations. And I was absolutely fascinated by this whole Chinese medicine concept. So I decided to learn more about it because I'm like, wow, this is amazing. And so then I was directed toward an Ayurvedic practitioner and I started looking at Ayurveda, which was another whole, fascinating medicine that is the oldest medicine in the world. And before even Chinese medicine. And so then I went to India. I went to India because I wanted to know more and I worked with Ayurvedic chefs and doctors, and I went both to the Himalayas and to Kerala, which is the south of India, because there are two different schools of Ayurveda there. And so I literally left no stone unturned trying to understand what it is that is going on in my body, but also alongside all this. Well, first of all, because everybody thought that chemo was the answer and I had to do chemo. I was, I cried for 3 months. I wasn't sure I can bear this because the pressure was so intense from everybody, including my family, that I was breaking, literally breaking at the seams because I knew in my heart that that was not the right choice for me. But it was so intense. The pressure was really intense. Because there's always this question, well, what if I don't do it? What if something were to happen, especially when, I have very young daughters at the time and I'm being told that they're going to be orphans. Like, do you really want that? Is that what you want? Like, that's what I was told. And I'm like, oh my God, like, what if that happens? There's always the what if that's in my mind.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it was very, very intense and very scary and very surreal because I felt like I had a handle on it, but everybody else was telling me that things are really bad and that I really need to go get with the program. So, one of the things that I did, is I started looking at, researchers of cancer and came across this well-known researcher who I emailed and asked if he would please take a look at all of my at all of my tests and labs and genetic tests and everything that I've had, and give me his opinion of what he saw, completely independent from my doctors who actually have a say in my care. He agreed to that, and he looked, and then he called me and he said, "Look, I can see exactly why you're being told what you're being told. I can see how uncertain your predicament is," which is the word he used, uncertain. And he said, "But," he said, "we're all looking at the same pathology report," which was a really interesting sentence. And I said, "Yeah, that was my pathology." And he said, "Yeah, but that was one person's opinion." And I said, "What do you mean? Isn't that science? How the cells behave? You're looking at my pathology report." And he says, "Yes, but it has to be interpreted by a doctor. And this was just one interpretation." I said, "Wow, that was the first really big realization for me." And I said, "Okay, well, what do I do about this?" And he said, "Well, you have to have your tissue, your slides looked at by the best pathologist in the country." "Who's that?" He said, "Well, he's actually not a clinician. He's at a university level, but he's the best in the field. And here's his name." And he gave me the name of Dr. Craig Elred. And he said, "Reach out to him." And he says, "You can use my name, but we don't know each other personally, but we know of each other from the medical circles, and see if he would do that for you." So I did. I reached out to him and he replied graciously and said that he would do that. And so I had the hospital FedEx the slides to him, and he spent a week looking at them. And then I will never forget the phone call. And he is like one of the foremost pathologists. He is the one who was looking at the estrogen positive receptor gene when it comes to breast cancer. So he knows, supposedly, I felt like he knew what he was doing, right? So he looks at my slides and he tests them. And then he calls me back a week later and he said, "Okay," he said, "I have a good idea of what's going on with you. And I can see why you're on the fence, but I can also see why your medical team is telling you what they're telling you." And he said, "I want you to understand something. Whatever it is you do," which again, at the end of the day, it's your choice. "But whatever it is you do, it doesn't matter. What does matter is that you have to change your life." And I said, "I'm sorry, what?" This phone call I was awaiting, this
Yeah.
foremost pathologist in the country. I want him to tell me all the medical terms and everything I need to do. And he
Yeah.
goes, "You have to change your life." And I said, "What does that mean?" And he goes, "I don't know what that means for you." He said, "I don't know anything about you except I know your age. I know how your cells behave. And if you don't change your life, you might not survive. And that's all I know because I can see what's happening in your body." And I was just dumbfounded by that. I remember when we hung up, and it was obviously a longer conversation than that, but that was like the most important part of it. When we hung up, I just stared at the walls and I did not know what to think at that moment because I had no clue how I would go about changing my life.
Was it not any, there was nothing more than that where it was like, nutrition related or stress related? That's all it was, is just change your life,
That's what he
but
said.
no further direction. Wow,
No
yeah, I
further
could see
direction.
why you would be dumbfounded.
Yeah. Yeah. No further direction. That's why he said, "I don't know anything about you except your age. But I know how your cells behave. And that's what I know based on what I'm looking in the microscope. What I'm seeing, here's what I'm seeing. And here's what I think is going to happen if you don't." And I'm like, "Oh my God." What do I do? And that's when my healing journey actually began, is I tried to untangle all of this and understand what does that mean for me and what it is that I need to look at. And it was not a quick process. It was a very long process. And there were so many parts of that process. Nutrition was just a part of it. It was the first part that I started with. And I've experimented with various diets, and to figure out what it is I needed to do, but besides nutrition, it was, doing other therapies that were available at the time. We're talking 2009, we're in 26 right now. It was also doing, and by therapies, I mean like hyperbaric oxygen chamber. 2009, nobody even knew what they were, right? There were very few places that had them. It's looking at my minerals, at my vitamins, and how my body's responding. Do I have any metals in my body? So a lot of things that have become more available and mainstream right now, but back in 2009, they were just like so niche and so unknown. And very few people not only were not looking at that, but they were not connecting any of that to cancer. And then also looking at my environment, looking at my relationships, looking at my patterns, looking at my emotions, looking at what I was connected with in my body, starting to meditate. That was another, actually, that's a really funny story, because when I decided to do a lumpectomy, I did do a surgery, lumpectomy. I interviewed a number of surgeons, and then I narrowed down to two surgeons that I was considering. And they both of them had completely different idea how they would do the surgery on the same tumor. Like, could not be different, any more different. And I was tormented because I'm like, how can I choose between surgeon A and surgeon B where it's so different? And so I would call them. So I interviewed them for 3 weeks in a row. I would call their office every single day with more questions. I literally tortured them, poor. And so their assistants and receptionists, they all knew me because, they would pick up the phone and be like, "Oh, Elina, yeah, well, doctor is in surgery. Can he call you back? Or can I answer a question?" And I would be, "Yeah, but, I have this question today." And so at some
Hmm.
point, one of the receptionists, as I was on the phone, she said, "You sound really stressed." "I'm not stressed. I'm fine." And she's like, "Have you ever considered meditation?" And I'm like, "No, what is that?" Didn't even know anything about it. She says, "I might want to look into this, and she gave me a few ideas where to look. And of course, I am a high achieving person. So not only did I find meditation within days, but I found a monk, not just a meditation class. So here I am meeting with this monk and meditating, and I have no clue what I'm doing or not doing. But it started my journey into connecting with myself on a much deeper level. And that's what meditation is. It's a tool to start understanding your body, beyond the medical testing, because we don't take the time, not because we do it on purpose, but because we're just not taught to understand what's happening with us. And we spend our entire lives reacting and following our senses. We smell, we see, we touch, we taste, all of this. But when you shut all of this off, where there is nothing that's coming at you, there's no simulation that's coming at you, and you're sitting and just feeling your body, all of a sudden you're hearing your body. And not right away, but there a moment that comes where all of a sudden you're hearing your organs, you're feeling them, and you're connecting to your body on a completely different level.
Okay. And so this, you found this out as you're interviewing these two different surgeons. And so did you end up ultimately going with the surgeon where the nurse was the one that recommended meditation?
No, actually, I went with a different one.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So then you ultimately had a surgery, and were they able to successfully remove all of the cancer,
Yes.
or what was the outcome there?
Yeah, yeah, it was a successful surgery. I had the tumor removed and was very happy that I went with the surgeon. Dr. Christy Funk is the surgeon that I went with, and she was pregnant with her triplets at the time of my surgery, and which was incredible. That she was, I think, 7 or 8 months pregnant. I mean, she was pretty pregnant,
Yeah.
with triplets. Yes, and
Jeez.
she is a rock star. I mean, I literally walked out of that surgery with a band-aid. I didn't have any tubes. I didn't. I mean, I cannot sing enough praises to her. You know, she's incredible.
Yeah, no
Sh
kidding.
Yeah.
Okay. And were there any um, updated scans or anything going into it based on the work that you'd been doing leading into the surgery? Had the tumor itself grown, shrunk? Were you able to affect anything about it leading up to that point?
So, no, so basically, up until the surgery, nobody was monitoring me besides they were just letting me be to decide. So I was doing my therapy, I was doing certain things, and then after the surgery, obviously, I had more scans and everything. So once once the surgery is done, technically you are considered cancer free, right? Because they remove the tumor from your body. But then, they tell you to do, or in my case, rather, they told me that I need to do chemotherapy because they couldn't tell because you can't detect cancer cells until they're a certain size and there is a tumor in the body. And so because of the aggressive nature of my particular cancer, there was a consensus that that chemotherapy was necessary because there was no way of telling if there are any cancer cells that are floating throughout my body, and especially after doing genetic testing, whether, and the recurrence rate was supposedly predicted pretty high. And I was told that that if I don't do that, I would have metastasis pretty soon, like within 17 months. That's the number that was floated around. I don't know how they came up with that number, but that's the number that was given to me. And, yeah,
Okay. Okay. And that was 17 years ago?
that was 17 years ago. Yeah, that whole 17 number is a very interesting number. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. But it
yeah,
was, so 17 months later, you didn't do chemo, you continued down this path, and there was no cancer. And then over the next 17 years, you've been cancer free this entire time.
yeah. But more than that, my oncologist actually at a 2 year, because at the beginning you go every 3 months and you get your blood drawn, and sometimes they do tests. You do mammograms pretty often, and but a 2 year mark, and I was always doing something, and I was always running. Whatever I was doing by my oncologist, and very often she'd just smile because like I said, I've interviewed multiple oncologists, and I settled on this particular one because even though she didn't always agree with what I was doing, she was very gracious and very kind, and she allowed me to do what I was doing, monitoring me without telling me that I was batshit crazy, which is what others were telling me. And so a 2 year mark, when I went for an appointment, she said, "Well, I think you're cured." And I said, "Wait, you're not supposed to say that. Aren't you supposed to wait for 5 years?" And she said, "Well, technically, yes, but your labs are off the charts and you're great. Just keep doing what you're doing. You're great." And so yeah, so that was incredible. That was absolutely incredible. And then she said, "You have to come to our foundation and talk to everybody about it because you're doing great." You know?
Yeah,
So,
and that's probably the time where you really started getting the attention of a lot of these Western medicine docs that um, maybe were of one opinion about the traditional standard of care being the only way, and you went a completely different direction, and you have outcomes that were better than many of those that had gone through. the traditional standard of care. So what was the if you had to just kind of put into a bucket the this world renowned oncologist researcher said you just need to change your life, and that's all they dumped onto your lap. You did change your life. What if you had to say this was like this is the way in which I changed my life? But the main components of it, what would you say those things were?
My goodness, I changed everything about my life, Matt. I ended my marriage. That was a big one. So that was a really big one. Took me a long time to make that decision. I changed a lot of my relationships. I changed the way I see my career, my life, life itself. Um, I changed my nutrition. I changed the way I care for myself and for my body and for my mind. I discovered spirituality that didn't even know existed up until then. I I started following my heart. Um, and so that was like at the beginning, but it's a constantly evolving. I call myself work in progress. It never ends. Like once you start on that path, it never ends because you're constantly learning more layers about yourself, which is kind of like the bigger picture of life, right? Kind of brings you to philosophy versus medicine. But we're so interconnected and we're such interesting beings, right? Why are we here? Why do we come here? When you're faced with death or terminal, diagnosis, you you're forced to look at life differently. You have no choice, you know, because there is always that possibility. I mean, that possibility around for everybody. None of us are guaranteed tomorrow, right? But when you have a diagnosis that forces you to look at it in focus, you really stop and you really wonder, okay, so if this is the last week I have, what do I want to do this week or this year? What is really important to me? And moreover, what do I want to be remembered as? You know, because up until then, I felt like I was very career oriented, family oriented, but I didn't stop to smell the roses, if you will. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And that became very apparent to me. It became very apparent how little regard I had for myself. I was always just putting out fires, and I was very good at that, and I was very comfortable with that. But I didn't know what was happening here in my own vessel.
Hmm. Hmm. And so it sounds like the counseling was instrumental because you went to the first session saying everything's fine, life is great,
Mm.
work's great, family's great, marriage is great. You just have this cancer thing that you're working through. And but the changes that you made were, ending the marriage, changing everything that you went into that first session saying were great, were many things that ultimately you walked away from and had major, pivots from. So, I mean, what were some of the aha moments that happened during the counseling, that really made you aware that all the stuff that you thought was fine were actually things that were likely contributing to your body getting cancer?
I think it was a slower process. It wasn't like it wasn't something especially in the early stages, it wasn't something that was like hitting me immediately and was like, "Oh my God, this is
Mm,
and this is this." It was more of a quiet, silent moments where I had to question myself and ask myself, is that really how I feel? Or this is something that I think. How do I, which is why I so prioritize and stress the logical mind and the heart, because we are so much in our heads these days. We're all connected to our phones, to computers. It's very hard to sit down and quiet enough to listen to your heart. and know what your heart is saying, which is back to the intuition. Like, why did I make that decision? Why did I say what I said? It's because I felt it in me. It wasn't my head rationally saying, this makes no sense, which happens a lot because I'm in my head a lot. To this day, I have to work on this all the time. It's not something that just happens. You have to work on this. It's like playing the piano. It's your own piano. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? The moment you stop, it's over. You got
Mhm.
to constantly fine tune it and constantly
Okay.
work on this. And to answer your question, there wasn't like a specific aha moment. They were more quieter moments where I was realizing, oh, this is not what I thought it is. And what do I do about this? How do I feel about this? And, and really just sitting with this enough to know that I felt comfortable in my body and in my heart to move through certain things. But as I went on this journey, and especially as I went on my spiritual journey, there were more doors that opened up and more moments like this that happened where I was realizing that, oh, I thought I got that solved 10 years ago. And oh boy, I did not solve this at all. I barely scratched the surface. There's so much deeper there. And that brings us to this whole conscious and unconscious and subconscious mind, because we're operating when we're awake in the conscious mind, which is only 1 to 5% of us. Most of our being, operates on the unconscious mind. And it's tapping into that mind and is where the gold is where magic lies. Yeah.
So when did you start helping others on their journeys?
Yeah. Well, so the first step in this was I wasn't planning on any of this. So just to
Right.
preface it, it was a very
Yeah.
interesting trajectory. So first, what happened is when my marriage ended, I got married when I was very young, and for the first time, I was on my own with two very young daughters and still in very much in the thick of my cancer healing journey and I wasn't working at the time because I was healing. That was my full-time job. And I had no income. And I was terrified because it wasn't just me. I had two daughters, I had to feed and take
Yeah.
care of.
Yeah.
And so it was around Christmas time, and I usually always do gifts for everybody. And this was the first year that I felt very vulnerable. I felt like I don't have the resources to do what I normally do. And so I decided that I am just going to cook for people that I care the most. And I blocked out a whole week and I invited different people and I made dinner for them. And at that time, I was vegan and soups were a big part of my diet because I discovered how soups actually help you heal, and that's a separate story we'll discuss. But and so everybody who came was raving about the soups, and they were like, "What's in them? This is incredible! Like, can I have some to go?" And one of the colleagues actually said, you need to sell them. I said, I don't know anything about selling. I'm a journalist. And she said, I'll tell everyone, I'll buy them. You have to sell them. And I kind of chuckled. And one of my daughters, Madeline, she said, Mom, look at the Uber people. Uber was just starting at the time. They're not taxi drivers. They're doing quite well. You can sell soup. It's okay. And I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about. It was like the weirdest thought ever. Like, I'm selling soup. Like, excuse me, what? So the girls, for a Christmas, they got me a ladle and they engraved Soupelina on it, which is soup plus Elina, my name. And Madeline made me a T-shirt with a little fairy, which is right there. That was drawn by my daughters, which
Okay.
she is in the in the frame, and they're like, Mom, you have no choice. You have to do this. And I can't say this to my daughter. So I'm like, sure, sure, sure. But like I wasn't in it, right? But I kind of was thrown into this. And so my friends were like, I'll buy the soups, I'll buy the soup. So I started selling the soup. And again, like I didn't go out to people and say, oh, by the way, I'm making the soup. This is what's about. None of that. It's just my friends were like, I'll buy the soup, I'll buy the soup. So that's how it started. And so then they were talking to their friends and they were talking to their friends. And all of a sudden I get random emails from people saying, can I buy you soup? It was really funny. It was
Mhm.
really funny because I'm like, how do you know about my soup?
Yeah.
And so Madeline did a website, and so we started selling soup. And so then I started getting, because I was working in the media, I started getting phone calls from my colleagues who are also writers, and they're like, "You selling soup? Can I write about it?" And all of a sudden, everybody's writing about my soup, and it was kind of comical. And so I
Well,
said,
and what was made, was it just the taste that made it so popular? Like what's your understanding as to why it started catching so
"Yeah,
much attention, and now people are, what are people writing about soup? Like what
yeah."
was it about the soup that people
Thank
love?
you for asking that. I'm downplaying. See, I'm reverting back to my downplaying thing. So people knew that I was on a cancer journey, and of course, I told them what these soups were, which is the recipes that I have created myself, that are based on Chinese medicine and Ayurveda and naturopathy. And by that,
Okay.
I mean that they have a specific combination of herbs and spices and plants that create a chemical reaction in a way, to create a medicine, really. And they're cooked very differently than your normal soup would be cooked, because I don't want to kill the enzymes and the vitamins. So they're layered. Ingredients are layered, and they're simmered and steeped versus boiled like normal soups are. So they're just medicinal potions, but they're delivered in a soup form. It's a functional food. It's therapeutic functional food that helps heal the gut, and is perfect for like cleanse and fast, because when somebody's going through a health opportunity, I call it health opportunity because it's an opportunity to change things about your life. But so when you're going through a health opportunity, your body, because our bodies are naturally designed to heal, right? But when we're eating and doing things that take a lot of energy and effort from the body to digest and absorb, the body is not able to divert all of its energy to healing. Moreover, most of us are walking around with guts that are either leaky gut or some kind of conditions that affect the ability to absorb the nutrients, to actually properly ensure that what you're consuming and putting in is actually going to be doing all the good in your body, which is what you want, right? So, which explains how a lot of people think that they're healthy and they're eating all of these salads. But if they're not able to eat salads, which is a whole other conversation, a lot of people cannot. B, if they're not able to digest those salads, and C, if they're not able to absorb the nutrients from all those great ingredients. So what good does that salad do? It doesn't do anything. So when it comes to soup, you get all of those vegetables in much larger quantity, and you get fiber, you get vitamins, you get minerals, you get enzymes, and it's all pre-digested. So your body is able to extract everything, absorb everything, and it doesn't have to go through an effort. So you're nourishing yourself and at the same time healing yourself. So it's an incredible food, incredible food. So that's really what it was, and besides, a lot of soups that are made for medicinal purposes. I don't know who's making them, but they're not tasty, and my soups are incredibly tasty,
Mm.
and people love it. And and so then I told them that I actually use the soup as a cleanse, not just as like a one off. And they're like, "Oh my gosh, can I have the cleanse?" So that's how the cleanse came about. And um and so then I was approached by the guilt group. I don't know if you remember, they were around. I think they're still around. but it was kind of like a luxury Groupon where they have those flash sales of different, services. It was like a different a different approach to sales. And so they asked me if I would do a sale on my cleanse, and I did, and they sold out within 24 hours. And then they came back, and interesting thing happened is that somehow, I still don't know. I only attribute it to the universe because I really don't have the answers. But I remember I woke up because they were running it around holidays, and I woke up day after, like the first Monday after New Year's, right? The first day that people went to work, which was the third or the fourth, whatever the date that was. and and I look at my email, and I have hundreds of emails from editors from different publications and people asking for soup cleanse. And I'm like, did everybody just wake up and say, I want the soup? Like, what actually happened? And to this day, I do not know what happened. It's just the universe answered. And then I got a tweet back when it was Twitter from Good Morning America saying that we're trying to reach you and you're not answering, and we want to
Mm.
do a story about you. And so then Good Morning America did a story about me and the soups, and that's when everything just kind of like happened. I was asked to do a book, and everything just became much more, much bigger, shall I say. But in terms of when I started working with people, all along, friends who would have somebody in their family or somebody knows would have somebody who was diagnosed with cancer. They would always call me and say, "Can you talk to so and so? My sister, my brother, my aunt, my friend, whoever." And I would spend hours on the phone with people, explaining to them what I did, what they could do, and, just kind of helping them along, but not doing it in any formal capacity, just helping them along. And then the first time when the formal thing happened is somebody I knew had a mother in law who had a third cancer recurrence and was given like very, very few months, I believe, at that time to live. She wanted me to work with her personally. And so I flew out to where she lived and worked with her personally. And her tumor shrunk by 60% within a week, which was crazy. And
Jeez.
yeah, and it was absolutely wild. I didn't expect that, but so opportunities like that would come along here and there, not something I was looking for, but people would just call. And I didn't charge anybody because I was just helping people out because I really
Mhm.
believed that that was the right thing to do, because my
Yeah.
business was soup cleanses and that's what I was selling. But when it comes to helping people and counseling them, and so for a long time, I kind of coasted along that because I was just too scared to go there. I was too scared to admit to myself that that's what I'm doing, and
Mhm.
and actually become formal and
Mhm.
actually do it as a business, if you will, but because I do feel like it's more of a calling and that it's something that I am here because I just know what people need. And it's a real privilege really to help people on that level to change their lives and to watch them blossom and become completely different people. It's incredible. It's truly incredible. Like when you start with people, I always tell people in the beginning, like, take a selfie of yourself today and keep taking selfies every week because by the time we're done, you will look like a different person, and they do. It's wild,
Wow.
truly wild.
Wow. I mean, you mentioned it earlier that our bodies are not designed to attack itself. They are designed to heal themselves, and we do have a miraculous ability to do it. And it's everything that you have laid out as far as why things became so popular. makes total sense, right? You know, if you have a soup, which you're not really doing that piece of it anymore, because you're fully immersed in the the helping people through these journeys. But if it tasted good and it was very effective at what it did, I mean, obviously that's going to be successful. And um, you know, uh, look, like maybe there's a part of this where the universe instilled um, elements within you to be able to instinctually know things, and feel things and sense things, and conclude various ways in which people need help. I mean, I believe that could very well be a thing. I also know that when you combine that with your your own journey of, like, you didn't just like Google meditation and watch some YouTube videos. You went and found a monk, worked directly with the monk, and you went to India. You just, when you combine what you invested in your own journey and learning and trial and error and experimentation with the unique gifts that you have, it um, it is something that should become a business when you're helping other people out, because of everything you've had to overcome in order to get to a place to really being able to be well positioned to help them. And so I'm glad that you figured that piece out, because when you and I connected, you told me this piece of it where you were doing this for free, which is incredible. I mean, what an incredible thing. But um at what cost? And when, I mean, I don't know anybody else out there like you, Alina, and so the world needs you to continue to have the gas in the tank, your own health, taking care of everything that needs to be taken care of for you, mentally, emotionally, physically, financially, so that you can help greater people, and greater amounts of people. And so now you kind of fast forward to today, and you have these 90-day programs, and I think that would be of real interest to those that are watching and listening to this, because most people have more than one uh, experience with cancer, whether it's they themselves, it's with others directly in their family. As I told you, a very dear 20 plus year friend of ours, in her early 40s, very healthy, non-smoker, non-drinker, exercises all the time, was just diagnosed with a lung cancer, um, but it's stage 4, and so now it's in multiple different parts of her body. People know people very close to them, if they haven't had it themselves, that are dealing with this, and so I think there's many others out there who, in their heart, they don't want to go down that chemo path either. They don't want to go down that standard of care that's being pressured onto them by maybe their oncologist, or the medical community, or friends or family, the same way you did. And so tell us a little bit about what your 90-day journey looks like, because we're going to provide the ways in which people can get in touch with you about it. But in the process of that, something else I learned from you that I didn't realize was that we always hear stages of cancer, stage 1, 2, 3, or 4, but there's different grades to it that are actually much more important, that I think would be, very helpful for you to kind of talk about as well, and how that fits into your programs and the way in which you approach these very individualized, very custom journeys that you work with your clients with. But tell us a little, educate us on the stages versus the grades, and then your journeys that you offer.
Yeah. Well, thank you for all that. So when it comes to cancer, I feel that, for lack of a better word, that as big of a word it is, when people hear the word cancer, most people hear death and some kind of bad outcomes, right? Cancer is also being looked at from a very simplistic lens. Um, we are being told that it is, you know, some kind of abnormality within our body, that the cells are not behaving properly and that they're, gathering into tumors. And why this happens, they don't know. Could be genetic, which is why they always look at genetic component to this. Could be other factors. Nobody really knows what the factors are. So that's the conventional approach. When it comes to holistic approach or integrative or functional, there are so many words these days, right? Is the the narrative is, let's look at the toxicity in your body and what could have contributed to this. Like, are you eating this or not eating this? Are you doing this or not doing this? And again, either approach, I feel, does not give justice to what cancer actually is. And cancer is a very complex, multi-layered disease. There is a reason why cells start behaving differently, which is where the grade versus stage, important conversation comes in. Because so most people know cancer by the stage, right? Most people know that it's stage 1, 2, or 3, but stage simply means how far the cancer has spread. So if it's stage 1, that means it's a contained tumor. If it's stage 2 to 4, it tells you like how how far it has spread, right? But people are not told most of the times what grade is, because a low grade cancer, which is grade 1, for example, means that the cells still resemble the normal cells. They have some abnormalities, but they still resemble the normal one. But if you go to a high grade cancer, which is grade 3, that means that cells have lost that resemblance almost entirely. That means that they're disorganized. That means that they're rapidly dividing. That means that they're behaving with far more aggression. And why does that matter? It matters because if you have a stage 1 cancer, which is contained cancer, right, with grade 3 tumor, it's contained, but it's ferocious. It you can have a person with stage 1 and grade 3 burn out within months. And you can have somebody with stage 3 or 4, but with grade 1 tumor, spread, but slow growing and less aggressive by nature. Very different clinical situation.
Mm.
And so the approach is very different. So, which is why, you cannot treat stage and grade the same. But the reason I believe we have this kind of predicament, and the reason why patients are not told what the grade is, because of the way the medical system is set up, because of the way the insurances are set up and the way the standard of care is set up. So there is no advantage to telling people what grade it is, because it doesn't matter in the way it's going to be treated, which is why it's never told to
Mm.
people. But it matters to
Which
me.
is extremely unfortunate, right? Because I mean, shouldn't it really matter if you have a grade 3, which means that, and maybe that's why people are being told you've got, 90 days. We're giving you 90 days, and so start preparing, things, because they're while they're not saying it's a grade of 3 based on the timeline that they're given. Maybe that's why they're coming up with that versus a different, time. You were given 17 months, after the fact. Um, but it does seem like it would inherently change like the speed in which things would need to happen, and how aggressive you would need to do it. But what you're saying is that doesn't necessarily change the medical system by way of like nothing. There's no levers that get pulled based on the grade that starts to
Exactly.
change how a patient would experience health.
Exactly. Exactly.
Oh,
Exactly. So the conversation should not be, where is your cancer? Okay. The conversation should be, what kind of cancer is it? And why is it behaving the way it is behaving? That's really the conversation. And at the moment, the conversation is, where is your cancer? It's here, which part of the body, how it's spread, what is affected, but that's not the conversation. So, so when it comes to, so when it comes to what I do and the container, like the 90-day program that I create, is the first thing that I try to understand with somebody who comes to me who has a cancer diagnosis is, and it doesn't matter whether it's stage 1 or stage 4, the grade matters, and but still, I don't believe that any cancer stage and grade cannot be reversed. I believe that can be reversed. So I believe that cancer is a deeper imbalance in the body.
And can I just
Yeah.
um can I just ask for clarification? Do you believe that because it's been your experience
It's
that
been my
whether it's
experience.
stage 4 or grade 3, you've seen that be reversed. You've helped, those experience reversal on that just as much as any grade, any stage, you've taken part in helping that reversal. That's why you believe that.
Yeah,
Is that
I
fair to
believe
say?
that. But that said, there's a caveat to that, is that, you know, I don't do any magic. I just want to be very upfront.
Sure.
There's no magic
Yeah.
involved, right? It's
Yeah.
a partnership with a person who truly wants to be healed and who truly wants to heal. And so it's a two-way street. I call it a dance. It's, you have to work hand in hand, and it's a very, very intense, but also beautiful process between myself and another person, because it's deep. It's takes 90 days is a significant amount of time, and it's a daily process where you can't just say, this is what I'm eating and this is what I am doing. You have to intentionally go through every stage of every protocol, and there are multiple of them as we move through the healing process, and participate in your healing at 100%. And you have to believe in it, you have to want it, and you have to work on it. And you can't drop any of those parts.
But here's the beautiful part about it is that when you had an invader in your own body and you had an aggressive form of breast cancer, you were told by um, the someone who's considered the leading pathologist or oncologist or researcher in this space, you were told change your life or else you're going to die. And in your program, which I've had an opportunity to look through it and get to really understand it, um, like you actually are defining what that means, but it is client specific. So you have your certain buckets and certain things that are covered, but how that's defined. So I just think it's incredible that, and again, this is why we need you to do this. And I really hope that my friend who I've given your information to goes through your program, and as long as it's the right fit, right, you two have to connect. But this is why we need you to to do well with this. Going back, like, this is the business of medicine. Like, you're in this space. We need you to do well with it because we need to figure out a way to scale this out for you, which is something that you and I are working on. And Madeline, your other little secret ninja behind the scenes, um, you know, uh, because you're giving them the tools. You were given change your life or else you're going to die. You're delivering. This is what exactly needs to change,
Mhm.
and you just need from them that true willingness and desire through action
To jump
to
in
change it.
and to jump.
And that's where magical things happen. It's not that you're a magician, it's not that you're a wizard, it's not that you can't even guarantee anything, but you can bring forward the information that you've had to figure out yourself.
That's taken
That
me so many years to figure out. And here's the thing,
Right.
medicine is really art. And, to offer the same or similar, care for everybody who has a disease with the same name, right? That goes to my oversimplifying something that is so great and so big, right? The way I look at it is every single one of us is a very unique and special being. And we are all here on our own journeys and our own lessons that we have to learn our own lessons as we move through this life. So when we have an event like cancer that comes into our life, when you look at from the spiritual lens, right? There's a reason for it. And so it is up to you to discover what that reason is and to decide what you want to do about it, and whether you want to go with your life the way you were, which is not going to work, which is why it ends, or you want to do something differently. And I want to say something about recurrences, right? Because so when a person is diagnosed with stage 1, for example, cancer, which is an isolated tumor, and they go through the process. Let's just say they are not even aware what the grade is, but they tell them that you need to do A, B, and C, and they go through the process, and then they're quote unquote fine. They beat it. They're in remission.
They get to ring the bell.
Right. They get to ring the bell. And then they go back to their normal life. What does that mean? So cancer did not appear in their body for nothing. It's not just some rogue occurrence and a bunch of cells that decided we're just going to play ball and we're going to create a tumor and cut us out and we're fine. Go back to life, right? That just, to me, it makes no sense. So there is a reason why this happened. And if a person ignores that first lesson and goes back to normal life without changing anything, and by anything, I mean the conditions that have created the environment for cancer, for the cells to misbehave and to create the tumor. So when those conditions are not changed, you end up with a recurrence. And when the recurrence happened, it happens after the surgery and after chemotherapy and after radiation, where the body has a very different way of reacting to things. So of course, it's more resilient, and which is why it ends up metastasizing and spreading to other organs, is because it's figured things out. The cells figure things out, and they spread. And that's why I always tell everyone, please do not ignore, no matter how optimistic your oncologist even is. And because there's so many people now that are women, especially, that are diagnosed with breast cancer. I saw statistics that are mind-boggling. I saw statistics that within the next 3 years, 1 out of 2 women will have breast cancer. To me, that's shocking. Like, how is this even possible? How? Why?
Yeah.
You know what I
Is that
mean?
in the United States? That's a United States study?
United States, yeah. It's like every other woman would have breast cancer at least once in their lifetime. So
Where the reality is we're bombarded. I mean, from every direction, at all hours of the day, um, in every way, with cancer, uh, um, things that cancer loves, right?
yes,
And in the United States, and yeah, that's a very troubling statistic.
it's a very troubling. I don't know, they reversed it, or I actually need to look it up again and see what, because every time they come up with different statistics. But what that tells me is that there's so much imbalance. Back to what I was explaining about cancer, it's multiple layers of imbalance. It's not just genetic possibility, but there's also epigenetics, right? It's not just toxicity. We live in crazy toxic times. It's not just stress. It's not just one or the other. It's all of the above. It's not just food. It's all of it. And it's all of it until there is a traumatic event. It's trauma also. It's childhood trauma. It's unprocessed trauma, and there's a tipping point that comes, which is when the diagnosis happens, or when it just reveals itself. And so when the tipping point happens, you can't just address one aspect of it and say, I took care of it. You have to take care of all of those aspects. Like, I call it like a wheel. You got to make sure that every single part of that wheel is taken care of, and you have not ignored a single side of it. And it's a big job. It's a big job and
Mhm.
journey. And it's a scary place to go because we want a magic pill and we want, the cure, right? And which is actually another conversation when that pathologist, Dr. Elred, we've had multiple conversations after that initial one. And I remember at some point I was talking to him and I said, "What about the cure for cancer?" And he says, "What about it?" And I said, "Do you think we'll ever find it?" He says, "It's already here." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he says, "Nobody will ever tell you that it's here, but it is here." And I said, "Okay, tell me more." And I said, "How about BRCA gene?" He said, "It's BS." He literally told me BS. I said, "Can I quote you on that?" He goes, "Please do." you So he basically told me, he said, "Look," he says, "cancer is a massive industry." And he said, when you think of an industry, and I don't remember in the numbers with the trillions or billions or whatever, all of those number things. But he said that cancer is not just the treatments. Cancer is the diagnostics. Cancer is the imaging. Cancer is the hospitalization. There are so many parts of cancer that
Hmm.
he said, if tomorrow everybody knows that there is cure, which there is, our economy would collapse. I said, "What do you mean?" And he's like, "Our economy is holding, and there are other industries, of course,
Yeah, sure.
that
Yeah, it
cancer,
makes sense.
that
Mm.
that if tomorrow we are all aware and in every television program, everybody knows that cancer can be cured, we would be in trouble economically. So let's keep that train going and saying that we're looking for that cure."
Yeah. And what was it that he said is the cure to it that already exists? It's what you're doing.
Yes,
It's the
it's looking at cancer from the multifaceted approach. It's realizing how many pieces it involves. Lifestyle is a big, 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 and again, lifestyle is one word, but it incorporates so much. It
yeah.
incorporates what you eat. It incorporates how you think. It's incorporate, where your mind is, how you take care of yourself, how you take care of others, what emotions going through you. There are so many pieces of this. Toxicity, another layer, also part of lifestyle, if you will. It's mold, it's metals, it's parasites, it's undigested food, it's the way we eat, even like sitting down for a meal. Do you eat intentionally and consciously, or do you just eat food because you have to have a meal? How do you handle the food? Handling food is very important. Where does that food come from? You know, everything is energy. Food is energy too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not just energy, how it's grown, and where the sun was and where the moon was and how the soil was treated, but also how we handle it once we actually have that vegetable or meat or anything for that matter in our hands. What do we do with it? Do we speak lovingly to this? We all know the studies that have been done with water, right? And how water changes its consistency and becomes either, healthy or unhealthy based on how it's being spoken with it. Do you know about that study?
Oh,
That's
I did not know about that. I've
fascinating.
never
It
heard
was
that.
it was done in
I know
Japan.
that about plants. Like you can talk to plants and make them healthier, but
Yes, same with water. You can actually, if you so you can experiment yourself, by the way. Take little cups of water, or you can do like the ice cube tray and speak to different one with different intentions, like speak to somebody angrily, shame another, love another, tender with another, and then freeze them. And then you'll see that they all have different patterns depending on how you spoke to them.
interesting.
It is fascinating. Yeah, it was done
And
in
there's been a specific
Japan.
study on it where they've looked at it
Yeah.
like at a wow,
Yes.
I'll have to look that up.
Yes. It's
That's super
fascinating.
fascinating. So
Yeah.
I think it's so I suffice it to say that what you do is transformational change, and and through this lifestyle change, and accepting of all the different areas in which um, change is required in order to regain health. Like it's the 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 life change that you create. It the byproduct of that is life saving. It can be
Correct.
life saving.
And it's
So
not just
you're
for
focused on
four or
changing
five.
life.
Yeah, it's not
They,
just creating lifestyle changes. It's also I do go with my clients through very deep detoxes, layers of detoxes, because
detox. Yeah.
toxins have to be moved through the body, and you have to be doing this properly. You can't just
Okay.
jump into a detox because you can create
Yeah.
more issues for yourself. So we go through that as well. And also another part of it is the psychospiritual part,
Right.
um, which we meet every single week, and we go over absolutely everything from the food you eat and specific ingredients and specific combinations to the water you drink to the tinctures we create together based on that particular person's biology, and everything else in between, the stressors, the toxicity, the relationships, the list goes on.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, suffice it to say, there's going to be some people listening to this that they are, they have cancer forming in their bodies. They just, it hasn't grown to a level to where it could be imaged yet. But they're 12 months or maybe 24 months away from it. And that's a that's a real thing for a lot of people who don't know that they're going to be getting this really bad news down the road. The cells are mutating and doing problematic things because of their lifestyle today. You're also having people listening to this that currently have the diagnosis, or know those who have the diagnosis, and then others who are on the other side of it, and they are, they've been given a clean bit of health. They've been able to ring the bell, and they're in the remission side, recovery side of it. It's a very large audience of people who would benefit this from. Quite frankly, it's everybody, but it's just you right now, and so you do have. I mean, you are, based on capacity, bringing people on into this 90-day program. Um, People go to your website and they can see that the endorsements that you have, which you have endorsements from literally some of the top doctors in the world, and doctors that their credentials stand on their own, and the fact that you have uh, endorsements from them. Um, it, I mean, it just speaks for itself, your credibility. And then you have all these testimonials by those that you've worked with and have been able to experience the ways in which you've helped them transform and change their life and recapture health, and that and get, basically earn their life back. So where do people find you if they're interested in this, and you are very particular on who you work with, because you need the right kind of person that if you're going to put your heart and soul into this, if you're going to, I mean, go on this journey and this very, eloquent dance with them for 90 days, that there's only so many people you can work with. So you really do need like the highest level of committed person willing there's no excuses. There's no talking healthy but eating fat. It's you're either all in, whatever that means, and they're going to trust the process, and those are the ones that you're looking to do this journey with. And then you have other methods in which you can help by people like just following you on your social media and things. But where do people learn more about these journeys? Where do people apply to become selected to go on this journey with you? How do people find you in that way?
Yeah. So my website is soupelina.com. It's SOUP, like soup. It's the original website, ELINA. But I also have elinafurman.com, which will reroute them to Soupelina, but it's also out there. So they can just search for my name, Elina Fuhrman, and the magic of internet will take them to me.
Okay.
And every time, every morning I set the intention that whoever needs me the most will find me. And I trust that the person who is ready for the kind of work that it takes and is ready to take care of themselves and of their health and their life in such a way will yeah, will be ready to embark on this journey to heal themselves. And it is, oh, it's such a beautiful journey. I am so grateful. I'm at a place in my life where I am grateful for cancer. I truly, truly am, because it's changed my life in such incredible ways. And it has taught me tremendous amount. And I would not be the woman that I am today if not for cancer knocking on my door and knocking my door off, rather.
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so, um, and I honestly, I know how devastating a diagnosis like this is, and how hard and scary it is when you receive the news and when you're trying to navigate it, which is why I do the work that I do now, is so that women would not do this alone, because I was doing this on my own, and there were times that it was brutal and it was scary, and I didn't know if I'm going to go on and if I could go through another day, because it was also really, really, really expensive, because I put everything on the line, because
Yeah.
it was that important for me to live and to be here for my daughters. And I'm just very grateful that I did. Very, very grateful.
Yeah. Okay. And in the weirdest way, it sounds weird in my head even before saying it, but you know, like it's there's a lot of people out there who are really thankful that you had cancer as well, right? And those are the people because of the way in which you've been able to help them, because of the way in which you helped yourself. And had you not been diagnosed and figured it out, and went and yeah, you just figured this whole thing out in a way to where um, people who don't want to go through such invasive, crazy uh, medications and chemotherapies, and they want to get rid of this intruder in a way that our bodies really can. Uh, like you uncoded that in ways that you've been able to heal yourself for the last 17 years, and work with several other people, and so there's a lot of people that are thankful that you got cancer as well, but we're also very thankful that you figured
I
it out and that you healed yourself from it. And so all of the links and everything, Elena, will be in the show notes for where people to find you, and really highly encourage, you know those of you that are listening to this, please share Elena's website, bring awareness to the fact that people do have options beyond the traditional Western medicine standard of care of chemotherapy and medications, and give the gift of knowledge and information and choice to your friends and family, whether they have cancer or not, there's a formal diagnosis or not. This is information that the big pharma and the hospital systems and those that are part of the machine that is a multi-trillion-dollar machine, they don't want people to know this message, and they will actively suppress the work that you're doing, Elena, and deter as much as possible, people from going down this path. So we have to take it upon ourselves to help share these kinds of messages. So please do that, and in that way, those that need this message, need the support, and are willing to go on that elegant dance and journey with Elena, they can do that. So thank you so much, Elena. Really, really appreciate you coming on
Thank
and
you so much
sharing
for
so
having me.
much. And super looking forward to the journey that we're on together in this whole process, and what's to come there. So thank you for joining, everybody. Take care. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.